Hi. Hi, there's 4 of us. And one of them's the monitor.
Oops, there's actually 5 of us.
And the other one's the presenter. Okay. Are we recording?
Yes.
Oh. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Peluso. I work with Family Services in Dutchess County, Poughkeepsie, New York. And I am the Sexual Assault Response Team Coordinator. In this position, when I first started at Family Services, I actually worked in the Elder Support Program, which had changed a few times since. So we did lose our funding at one point, and then recently are able to hire an elder abuse specialist again. So I'll get started. And if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat box, and I probably can answer them as we go along. Okay. All right, so the first slide here, on elder abuse, this is an overview of the stages of individuals and the basic information on their possible experiences during these stages of life. So like it says in mature adulthood, 50 to 80, people have probably raised families, established themselves in their work life, and become contributors to the betterment of society through volunteering, mentorships, and other forms of philanthropy. In late adulthood, age 80 plus, people have required a rich repository of experiences that can help guide others. They represent the source of wisdom that exists in each of us and help us avoid the mistakes of the past while reaping the benefits of life. If you were like me when I was in my 20s, I didn't really listen to a lot of elderly people when they talked about things. Now I look back and wish that I did, because they are a source of many experiences and a lot of wisdom. And I try to tell my kids that. So baby boomers, here's a slide, the significance of the baby boomer population, which shows that there will be an increase of older people, older Americans. There is an increase of older Americans, and it's become known as the graying of America, and that is due to lower birth rates, lower death rates, and increased life expectancy. Here's a little slide just showing the percentage. This was 2000, 12%. It may be higher now. By 2029, more than 20% of the total US population will be over age 65. So there's a good reason to look for services and increase awareness of elder abuse, and just make sure that we're aware of the elderly population that live near us and what's going on with them. This is a definition of elder abuse. There is no universal accepted definition of elder abuse. This is a definition created by New York State Social Services Law. Any form of mistreatment that results in harm or loss to a person age 60 or over, and an intentional or neglectful act by a trusted individual or caregiver. So, some of the clients I had in the elder support program may not have been over 60, they were over 55. So it's how it's defined, and since there's no universal definition, I did have clients who were over 50 also. And I want to say something about that. The clients that were over 80 seem to fare much better than the clients that were between 50 and 70, I would say. 70 and up seem to fare much better. Some statistics, 1 in 10 elders may experience some type of abuse, and every 1 case of elder abuse that gets reported, another 23 cases never come to light. So why does anyone want to put in the chat box why they think that is? Why it's not reported? Okay, so I don't see anything. Oh, there it is. So sometimes not know what's happening to them. True. That's true. Fear, no access to services. They don't know where to report. All good answers. Also, you know, it may have something to do with who's doing the abuse to them and what is their relationship to them. And we're going to talk about that more further on. So these are some barriers to protecting elderly people. There's a tendency to stereotype older victims: senile, fragile, long-winded, grumpy, hard of hearing, unable to see well. And it causes us not to take seniors seriously. Being able to use them in a case, in a prosecution case, it can cause problems there if people aren't taking them seriously, or if they are suspected of getting early Alzheimer's or dementia. And that is used a lot against elderly people, where when I went on cases, their family members or the person who was abusing would say something like, well, they forget things, they make things up all the time, and you know, you can't take that seriously. Another thing about this slide is I wanted to mention, I thought about it when I was in the Elder Coalition. It no longer exists in Dutchess County, but one of the things that came up there was the fact that we send people, older people, cards about becoming older. If you think about some of those greeting cards, and I've stopped doing that since they talked about it, and it seems like a small thing, but it kind of encourages that type of mentality of looking at elderly people as weak and grumpy, hard of hearing, they can't see, disabled, and that's not always the case. So many of the greeting cards that are out there talk about, oh, you know, they make jokes about not being able to see, not being able to remember things. So that's something that I stopped buying. And it may seem like a small thing, but, you know, in light of this kind of abuse, it can be, you know, it makes a difference. Underestimating, of course, perpetuates abuse. We underestimate what somebody is capable of and what their thoughts are and their mental capability. They're more likely to be abused further. So here are different types of elder abuse. If anyone wants to type into the chat box, which one of these do you think is the most common in America? Maybe elsewhere too. I see neglect, financial. Okay, so these are actually in the order of the most prominent types of abuse to the least, or at least that's reported. So financial exploitation is number one. For those of you who put that down, neglect is right behind it. Emotional mistreatment, physical abuse, and sexual mistreatment. And you can only imagine the last one is not really reported when it happens. As we know, in sexual abuse with anybody is underreported. So we'll talk about financial abuse. The use of undue influence as a lever to gain control over money or property. Theft, fraud, misuse, or neglect of authority. And also, you think about scams, that really should be in here also, because it's very, very prominent in Dutchess County and elsewhere. People coming to the door, knocking on doors, trying to sell something to an elderly person. I've had it happen to me, actually. Not that I fell for it, but it, you know, I could see how an older person who doesn't know much about this information would fall for it. So things like promising to do your roof and I need the money up front, they take the money and then they are off. In Dutchess County, we had a case, I think it was over $25,000 taken out of someone's bank account through a phone call, where they asked for their information, their bank information, Yes, Cheryl put, I get calls from Social Security a lot. Yes, I've gotten those calls threatening me that I'm going to be up for charges if I don't respond or something. And, we had one guy coming to my door who was trying to sell some kind of bug spray that would keep bugs out of my yard for, the next year or something. And I saw his picture the next day on Facebook, and that they were looking for him in Connecticut, and that he had a gun, and that he would have people go to the other side of the house while they were talking to you to rob your house. So there's all types of things that are going on out there. And very common is the people door to door, and people calling up saying, pretending they're the person's grandson or granddaughter and that they're in jail. And many times they'll say, I'm injured in my mouth, so that's why I'm not talking properly. So that's how they're really good at what they do, these scammers. And once that they give that money over, it's very hard, almost impossible to get it back. The sheriff's office have been involved in Dutchess County in quite a few cases, and it's really sad. These are these people's life savings they've given away. So here's some of the signs of financial abuse. If you are, working with somebody who is older, sudden changes in finances, altered wills and trusts, unusual bank withdrawals, checks written as loans or gifts. Many times someone will befriend an elderly person in the neighborhood. They'll do chores for them, go to the store for them, and then money starts disappearing. Or we've had cases where they've given checks to the people. And even though, we would try to tell them that they were stealing from them and scamming them, they would still insist, oh no, they're just helping me and they need the money. And many of this stems from their loneliness and isolation. So also when you see an elderly person who they don't have many amenities, that we know they can afford, that may be a sign. Using items without permission. I'm going to go back to the isolation piece. I believe personally that isolation is the root cause of many of these scams and elder abuse, because they're so isolated. They're more likely to be abused, or they're more likely to be scammed by somebody, because they're looking for that friendship and for anybody who will, talk to them. So in the Elder Abuse Coalition and the Criminal Justice Council subcommittee, we created a scam list, a list of different scams and a puzzle that would go into many of the elderly people who couldn't get out of the house, who would get their meals delivered to them. So we would put it in there with the menu, with the Office of the Aging menu, because those were the people that, excuse me, weren't getting out. Excuse me. They weren't getting out to these community meetings and learning about this. So that was a way of getting it to the people who were isolated. So neglect, there's active neglect and passive neglect and self-neglect. So active neglect is purposely neglecting to take care of somebody. Passive is something like, we have to look at that when we work with elderly people, because sometimes the person who's taking care of them is just so overwhelmed that they're not able to keep up with it. And we also have to look at the caretaker's needs, and maybe they need some kind of respite. And there are places that will take in an elderly person to give that caretaker some respite. Safety, physical needs, emotional needs, isolation. Like I said, again, isolation is going to keep coming up here. And self-neglect. Many of the elderly people I worked with really didn't have anybody else coming in. So, I would notice, they might not be taking care of themselves or keeping themselves clean, keeping their clothes clean. Here's some of the signs of neglect. Like I said, wearing soiled clothing, hygiene, dirty appearance, malnourished, they're not eating, untreated physical problems, and wearing inappropriate clothing for the weather. Physical abuse is the most bullet says. I have worked with people who have had not only financial abuse, but also physical abuse. So many times it's not just one form of abuse, there's other things going on that people have to keep an eye out for. So unexplained bruises, fractures, welts, burns, pressure sores, marks, anything physical that seems out of the ordinary. And of course, what are people going to say who are taking care of these people to hide the abuse? What are they going to say that happened? Yes, they fell, always walking into things. They can't see very well. They're being clumsy, right? It happens a lot with child abuse too. And, you know, many times kids do hurt themselves running into things. I know my kids have. So, you know, you have to be aware of, you know, there is a possibility that they are unexplained bruises that maybe are explainable. So that's when Adult Protective Services gets involved. Sexual abuse. This is the one that is the most ignored or denied because people don't think it can happen to older people. But I'll tell you, being in the rape crisis program for years, I've seen quite a few elderly people that were sexually abused in homes, in nursing care facilities, and many times I've noticed that they weren't believed. Just like with sexual abuse, sexual assault on even younger people, we hear that a lot. And this becomes with, you know, all of the myths of sexual assault are believed by people, and they continue into sexual abuse of adults. So it's very common that when it does happen, people are not believing those people. And you can only imagine when you show up at the hospital for somebody who's been sexually abused who in their 80s, how terrible it is for them to even talk about it. And many times they didn't even want to talk about it, and they didn't want to do anything against that person. Here's some of the signs of sexual abuse in an adult, older adult: having problems walking or sitting, developing a sexually transmitted disease, bruises or irritation, panic attacks, symptoms of agitation, and social or emotional withdrawal from others. I know that the people that I did meet that were older adults who were sexually abused barely could talk about it. And it was one of the many sad cases to be on. I was supposed to ask this question before I put this slide up, but I think you probably all know. Who is likely to abuse an elderly person? 90% of abusers are family. 50%, right? Gonna put down family. Adult children, 20% intimate partners, and other abusers include friends, neighbors, and service providers. I would say I had 13 cases when I was in the elder program, and probably 11 of them were family. Even if they had abuse from another person, a caregiver or service provider, it still stemmed from the family member who was also abusing them. And I'll talk about a couple of those cases later. So men and women abuse older adults almost equally. 48% are women and 52% are men. 1/3 of them are themselves seniors. So we've had, domestic violence cases with older adults, and that becomes an issue because if we have to get that person to a safe place, it's difficult to find a shelter or even for them to want to go to a shelter. I know that there's, I believe, a nursing home in, I want to say Riverdale, which is kind of far from here, but I believe that they keep a certain amount of rooms for people who are victims of domestic violence. And hopefully, other places will start doing things like that. There's definitely not enough services for the elderly people. So adult children, this is a little breakdown here, as you can see. Most of them are family members. And this is the reason why it's so difficult, because they don't want to isolate themselves further by reporting that person or getting an order of protection against that person. One of the cases I had, a woman had a home, and she was had a disability, and her, I believe it was her nephew or younger cousin, moved in and had friends coming in who were dealing drugs, and she was terrified. They would come up near her room and she was afraid of them. So that was a very successful case. We did end up getting her to go to court, get an order of protection, and the judge was great. He said to the abuser, if you go in her house again or anybody else goes in, you're going to jail. And he did not come back. He was terrified of the judge. So, and terrified of going to jail, obviously. So that was a successful case. They're not always like that. People don't always want to report. And even when they do, sometimes the district attorney's office has, issues with whether they can put them on the stand. It can also be difficult. So what prevents people from seeking help? They're ashamed, they're embarrassed. That's what I was getting at with the sexual abuse. They're humiliated that this even happened to them. And one of the people that I met who was in her 80s, I met her at the hospital, and the abuser who was sexually abusing her was her grandson. So you can only imagine the embarrassment and humiliation that's involved. They will be dependent upon the abuser. They're afraid of them. Placement, hospitalization, a loss of perceived stability. I'm going to talk about a case later that highlights this. And also family dynamics or pride. They care about the abuser. Very similar with domestic violence, right? Oh, we are at the case examples already. So one of the cases, well, I had a few different ones that I worked on a lot, but there was one case of a woman who, she had a disability. She wasn't able to see well, and she was one of the most organized people I've ever met. She had everything in its place. She would cook for herself. She would buy cleaning supplies, food. She knew exactly where she was putting everything, because you can imagine if she's cooking for herself, she doesn't want to use something, that is a cleaning supply. But she was one of the most organized people. And the reason I'm saying this is she called up one day and said, I had, I believe it was Walmart gift card sitting on my coffee table, and it's gone, and I know who took it. And I said, who? And she said, it was the aide, because she was the only one in the house, and I know she took it. And I totally believed her, because I know if she said she put it on the coffee table, it was there. She had all her phone numbers organized, everything in a tape recording. She was amazing. She was much more organized than I am. So I told her, I said, you know, before you call the police, wait until I get there, because I knew what was going to happen. What did you think would happen if the police showed up? What would they think? Or what could they think? I shouldn't say they will. You forgot? Yep. And remember, she had a vision disability. Yeah, she misplaced it. She can't find it. She lost it. So I wanted to be there because I wanted to talk to them ahead of time and tell them, you know, just so you know, if she says it was there, it was there. And I've known this woman for a while, you know. So it did end up that, interestingly enough, another one of my clients had a Target gift card. And her original victimization was that the aide that worked with her spent $1,000 on her credit card, and she would not charge her with it. She would not press charges. But she kept saying she would pay her back. So she ended up having a Target card that she sent to her grandkids in another state. And at first I was thinking, well, the Target card is messed up. I'll call Target for her. And then I thought about it. I said, who was with you when you bought this? And she said, oh, my aide. And then it hit me that the aide sent the blank one. You know how you could pick up the blank ones at the register. A blank Target card to her grandkids and kept the one with the money on it. After putting two and two together, I realized that this was the same aide as the other woman's aide. But the sad part was we couldn't really do anything about it because although the other lady was ready to press charges, they couldn't prove that it was her. Walmart, by the way, has a fantastic security system, and they were able to see who spent that gift card at Walmart, but it was not the aide, so it's possible that she sold it to the aide or somebody else. So they weren't able to do anything about that or prosecute it. If she would have been the one spending it at Walmart, then they could have done something. As far as I know now, most healthcare organizations, home care organizations still do not have background checks. I don't know if anybody knows whether or not that's changed. I don't think it has, but I know that, you know, some states have it. New York State does not have background checks on home health aides. Some organizations, they're not required to. So that was one of the examples of the aide stealing from them. Another example I wanted to talk about was a woman whose daughter has had an addiction and she charged her card up really high. And this woman was paying back little by little. I was helping her with the bills to pay it back. She would not press charges against her daughter. And she told me one of the worst things her daughter ever did to her was she wouldn't give her charge card, so she took away her walker, and she was stuck in her chair for a whole day and night without her walker, was not able to go anywhere, go to the bathroom, do anything. But like I said, these cases are so difficult because that was her daughter. And even though she was angry at her, she would not press charges against her, or, you know, the girl was trying to get help, but she definitely had a very difficult addiction issue. So that was another example. I'm trying to think if there was anything besides the financial, you know, and many of these people who were family members, you know, it would get a little better because they knew I was coming every week and meeting with that person. I would meet with them once a week for about an hour, help them with their bills, possibly, you know, sometimes drive them places. So they always knew that there was somebody there. But I had abusers who would abuse them emotionally right in front of me. And they had no problem doing it. So I could only imagine what was going on when I wasn't there. The other thing is we would try to get, adult protective services involved. This one woman, she would put all her mail. By the way, out of the 13 elderly people that I met with, I would say 11 were hoarders also. She would have mail all over her house, on top of her stove, and I was worried that she would light the stove and set a fire. So I did call Adult Protective Services to get involved. I happened to be there when they knocked on the door, and she said, "Who are you?" And they said, "Adult Protective Services." She slammed the door right in their face. So if they refuse the help and they have somebody else who's visiting, like I was visiting, then Adult Protective Services may not be involved. Why is it not moving? Sorry. Okay, so here's some ways that anybody can help. Be aware of the possibility of elder abuse, recognize the signs and the clues that we talked about, listen to older adults and let them tell you about their experiences. They have a lot to offer. And it's so important for them to have that connection with younger people, others in their life, because so many people are isolated. And to me, that's the main cause of what's going on in our society right now, is that they don't have anybody. When I was a kid, many elderly people would live with their families when they got older. A lot of times now they're isolated by themselves. Some of the people I worked with, their families didn't even want to see them. They didn't want to talk to them. They never came to visit. And like many people in nursing homes, you'll see that. Call or visit an elderly loved one, very important, and neighbors too. And give a break to a caregiver. If they're having a difficult time and you know somebody who's taking care of an elderly person, it's not easy to take care of somebody who's older on a regular basis, 24 hours a day. So if anyone can help give a break to somebody, that would be great. Here are some Dutchess County resources. Every county has an adult protective services. It may be called something different. Consumer Frauds and Protection Bureau, very good for those scams. New York Attorney General's office was a great help to me while I was an elder abuse advocate. I used them many times. They really get involved and they really go after that person. District Attorney's office, family court has been helpful, because if that person's related to them, they can get an order of protection if they are willing to do that. And of course, legal services of the Hudson Valley. So does anybody have any questions? My mother was left on the commode all night in a nursing home, but it wasn't considered a problem to admin, just busy staff. Yeah, yeah, I've been in nursing homes, believe me, and one of the biggest issues is that many of the people who are hired into nursing homes are very low paid and work long hours, not the greatest working conditions. And there's probably not enough staff. I've been at trainings where they've said, that's one of the biggest problems in nursing homes today. But, anything that happens in a nursing home is supposed to be investigated by the Justice Center when there's a report of something. It's in their funding, and they are supposed to send it to, I believe it's the New York Justice Center up in Albany, but they are supposed to investigate that. It's not something they're supposed to just say, oh well, they were just busy. That's not okay. Horrible.
I spent some time in a nursing home myself after surgery, and I was horrified. Unless someone had family
Yeah.
It was very rare for people, people are left alone for hours and hours and hours, even when they're
Right.
ringing their bell and ringing their bell, usually to,
Right.
usually to go
Oh,
to
yeah.
the bathroom. It's
Oh,
humiliating, just humiliating.
it really is. And also like bed sores are a big problem in nursing homes. They're not being moved enough. I've been in a few different nursing homes visiting some of the elderly people I worked with. There were a couple that were pretty good. A couple I had to get involved and say, can you please come to this room? She's been trying to call you. It's a big problem in the United States. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? So I know there's a lot of education out there now with post office, people who notice the mail is piling up, things like that. So people being aware is a big part of changing this. And also they are training people in places that do Western Union and Western Union, because Western Union is used a lot in these scams. In fact, I was in a place one day and I saw an elderly woman trying to get money sent, and some character walked up behind and whispered in her ear. And of course, my red flags went up because of the work I do. So I talked to the person at the desk and I said, are you all aware of, different scams that occur? And she said, yeah, that they have been trained on that. And she has actually refused to send money for somebody because she knew it was a scam and she wouldn't let the woman send it. I didn't know they could do that, but yeah, so that happens. Also, the Office of Victim Services has a new law that with scams that they can pay up to, I want to say it's like over $25,000 related to a scam for an elderly person. The problem is the eligibility requirements are so strict that it rarely fits into any of the clients we worked with. So basically, the elderly person has to be incapacitated totally, where people have to help them go to the bathroom, they can't walk, to be able to get this money. So they need to, I think, change that, because it's really strict and not many people are going to fit into that category that have been scammed. Many of the people who are scammed are, like you and me, and they believe somebody when they come to their house and say they're going to do their roof. I know enough not to pay somebody up front, but a lot of people don't, they're trusting, the person seems nice, so they end up paying for it and they never get that money back. Very rare, unless, the sheriff's office gets involved and actually finds the person. So, be aware of it for any older adults in your life, and also if you do any work with elderly people. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us today. And if you have any questions, you can email me. I don't know if my email is on here actually. Oh, here's our hotline numbers, our resources for Dutchess County Family Services. And you can call the Crime Victims Hotline for any older adult. Actually, that's a hotline that's used a lot overnight because Adult Protective Services is not open 24 hours. Emergency 911. Here are some other resources. The Ombudsman keep track of nursing homes, and they're kind of advocates for people in nursing homes. And that's Bosch. So if anyone has any questions, you can email me at kpeluso, Peluso at familyservicesny.org. And Bosch is our comfort dog who goes to court with people and comforts our clients when they're in crisis. and it's the district attorney's dog. I see something here. Hold on. Thanks. Thank you for coming. The hat.